Welcome to Speak of the Devils, the premier podcast for Sun Devil football. I'm Brad Denny with 3TV.
I'm Joe Healy with DevilsDigest.com.
All right, Joe, the day that has been basically 3 years in the making. We've all been kind of waiting around, and this black cloud's been hanging out. But the NCAA has finally announced some of the violations and penalties that are headed ASU's way. But in typical NCAA fashion, it's not in its entirety. It's still a work in progress, but we have a significant amount of info, and we know what some of the things that are coming down the pike for ASU on the disciplinary front. And to kind of break this down, we're kind of going with somebody, longtime friend of the show, but also somebody who's at the forefront of this breaking news back in, I believe, summer of 2021. The one, the only, Ralph Amsden. Ralph, thanks for coming on, even under these less than ideal circumstances.
You're welcome, ?
All right, so let's dive in. The NCAA today on this second breaking news podcast in 2 days span, because it's always something university, announced that a portion of the penalties for ASU and 4 individuals tied to the investigation mitigated level 1 violations. Was a negotiated settlement that the agreed upon violations include impermissible in-person recruiting contacts during the COVID-19 dead period, recruiting inducements, impermissible tryouts, and tampering. And the negotiated resolution also involved the agreement that the underlying violations demonstrated unethical conduct by the involved individuals and a head coach responsibility violations. Several involved individuals also failed to meet their legislative responsibility to cooperate during the investigation, and the school also agreed it failed to monitor its football program. Guys, first, obviously a lot of this stuff we knew. First reaction when you actually kind of got the full run of what the NCAA and these mitigated level 1 violations brought.
I mean, for me, it's closure, but closure like my parents got some new front doors put in, and when they tried to shut the door, it wouldn't shut all the way, and so you had to repeatedly shut it. So it's like you think there's closure, but then you have to still work at and wait for additional closure, I guess is the only way. It's interesting to get some information after nearly 3 full years, but it's also kind of odd that, why do you announce, in my opinion, why do you announce something when you don't have everything to announce? It's the NCAA, it's college sports. It's of course ass backward by definition, but I don't know how to feel, because the biggest things on the table that need to be identified are yet to be identified. We're talking about, and we'll go into detail, I'm sure, about potential scholarship reductions or recruiting impact. I mean, if that's one scholarship 1 year, cool, that's easy. If it's double digits for multiple years, that's something of a different color altogether. So again, little bits of closure, but still pressing and slamming, trying to get that door shut.
Sanctions can turn a good coach into a mediocre one, and nobody should know that more than Arizona State, who got Lane Kiffin tarmacked in the middle of USC dealing with major sanctions from the Pete Carroll era. And it's frustrating because Kenny Dillingham took this job knowing to some extent what was coming. And I'm assuming that he's been well informed as this process has unfolded. But when you actually get to the point where you start to face down the consequences for somebody else's actions, I think it feels just less and less fair. Some of this stuff I did not realize. I didn't realize that anybody maybe came into the program that was part of being illegally recruited. I thought a lot of those guys might have gotten scared off. And I don't want to speculate as to names, but there's already a couple of that are out there that maybe would have related in or resulted in Arizona State having to forfeit wins and vacate records and stats, and which is a bummer, because are the 200-yard Rachaad White rushing games, are those just not a thing anymore? Did those not happen? Did we imagine them? The whole thing's just a huge bummer, and also to not have really any clarity. The idea that they went on to protect people involved because they're still dragging their feet. It's been years. It's been almost 3 years. And the idea that they can't give Arizona State fans more details about what exactly was going on, that part of it's really, really frustrating. Like, we're only getting these glimpses, and the waiting's not over yet. And are they actually going to release all the information when they do? Or do these people have the power to drag it out 2-3 more years beyond this? Because Antonio Pierce has no motivation or incentive whatsoever to do anything to help Arizona State at this point. How long can he drag this out?
Yeah, and so it's obviously the two key focal points here, Antonio Pierce and Herm Edwards. And obviously, I believe Herm, who's now 69 years old, I mean, he's never coming back to coaching, so the show cause penalty is kind of a toothless gesture, and obviously Antonio Pierce is off coaching the Raiders. And so kind of the rundown that was announced today, what we do know is heading ASU's way, and as you guys alluded to, just, these are penalties that the program is having to face with the people and the perpetrators long since departed. 4 years of probation, which is itself is not a penalty, just kind of like a don't screw up during that span. A fine, an unspecified fine. They also cited the 2023 bowl ban that the ASU self-imposed. Then the vacation of the wins for the games that ineligible players have played. Chris Cartman reported that includes all 8 wins in 2021 and the Washington and Colorado wins in 2022, leaving the only official win for ASU during that 2 years is the NAU win. I've always thought, obviously vacating anything, an event that had already happened, is relatively dumb. Scholarship reductions, which is not specified amount to the NCAA, although I'm hearing that it is only going to be a couple. Recruiting restrictions, which seem like it would be in terms of being able to contact over the summer. Then the show cause penalties range from 3 to 10 years, for the 4 individuals, and they must disassociate with an unnamed booster for 5 years. And the committee also made sure to note that the final decision, including potential violations and penalties for other involved individuals, is still pending. Now, looking at that list of what's coming ASU's way from the NCAA, any of those more damaging than just the black cloud of uncertainty that's hung over the program for 3 years?
I mean, not if it ends up in the way that you introduced it. Like I said, hopefully if the scholarship reduction is minimal and short term, then, you can work around that. Obviously, if that were something, again, that was like double digit per year for multiple years or something, to that extreme extent, then that could even things out a bit. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about a 3-year span of time. Think about the condition of the program as you were kind of in this position about 3 years ago. So before, obviously, everything came out, but when it was spring of 21, after, pretty encouraging reduced season of 2020, there was a lot of momentum for this program. So the arc, I mean, it's not really an arc. It's some geographic design that's difficult to really identify, just how things have crumbled to the ground in a short bit of time. That's an impact. So to answer your question, I think the damage that has been done greatly outweighs and exceeds anything that could happen from this point, as long as, again, what we're thinking is the case will be the case.
I have to agree with Joe 100%. I mean, this is I think the most annoying thing about it, especially if the scholarship reduction isn't prohibitive, the most annoying thing about it is, is Washington fans, Arizona fans, USC fans being able to say that, Arizona State's wins didn't count. That's going to be annoying. But for the most part, it feels like at this point that these are survivable penalties, and that the ultimate punishment was the time that it took to reach any type of resolution whatsoever. And that is still the thing that stings the most is the waiting. Because when the monster finally comes out of the closet, you look it in the face and it's 5'8", has no teeth. Then you don't have anything to be scared of. But when it's in that closet, it could be anything, right? And this punishment, I was thinking that it certainly could have been more extreme than it was, but I certainly wasn't aware that it was going to include allegations of. I mean, why wouldn't it? Tampering and playing ineligible players. They seem to be down for anything. That staff was. So just disappointed, just incredibly disappointed at the 2.5 years that Ray Anderson spent kind of publicly blaming this on assistants when this seemed to be a massive lack of institutional control from the top down.
So one thing is kind of weird to add, and I'm trying to think of the best way to word this, is because I thought that it was like, because we're on the topic of ineligible players playing, so presumably ones that were acquired by way of these illegal recruiting tactics. Because I had thought, and it was my impression, that it was just the typical ASU move that they cheated and got nothing out of it. Got no players out of it. So I'm almost in a weird way like, okay, at least you did something. You got whoever this player or players that played, in circumstances that they should have. It's like, I guess you got something out of it. Maybe they I don't know. This is kind of like a grimy thing to say, but again, like at first and for these couple years up until today, it was my impression that, man, what a typical, always something university move of you do all these things that cause this multi-year investigation and you literally get nothing tangible out of it. Like, at least be a USC. If you're going to go about things the wrong way, get some Heismans, get some national championships, like go for it, But there's that always something university.
Yeah, I can't. I'm in a space where I'm just staring at the 2022 roster, and I'm like, which one of you was here illegally? I feel like I'm not gonna take that the direction that I had planned to. I'm self-censoring. That's the penalty I'm imposing on myself. But I am just kind of staring at the roster right now, like what did we do after they were gone? Like, come on now.
Yeah, and so obviously right now you got a lot of ASU fans just kind of really pissed off, kind of just old wounds opening up in terms of Herm, AP, Ray Anderson, and Ralph. You had a tweet earlier that I thought had some numbers to it, but now that we have presumably kind of the bulk of what's coming to ASU's way, at least the current ASU program, the people no longer here seem like they might be in line for further disciplinary action. But as of right now, presuming that this is kind of the bulk of this 3-year drama, how do you divide the blame? Where should the ire of Sun Devil fans be directed?
Well, I'm all in on Ray Anderson. I'm very curious to hear what Joe has to say on this.
I mean, essentially in a circumstance like this, you have to drive it up all the way to the top, and that's the starting point. So certainly can't absolve others of blame, but when it essentially is comparable to me, like the Herm Edwards element of it. There were people affiliated that were previously a part of the team who would catch me on DMs and say, no, Herm's not responsible. It was all the assistants I had, and I'm not, people who were affiliated with the staff have told me that. I'm like, it just doesn't pass the smell test that someone who is in charge of an entity doesn't have control over that entity, even if by design delegation is what you do. Like that still creates a circumstance where there is viable, applicable blame. And lo and behold, what happened? That person has been held accountable. So I think that trickles upward, as you said. Who was that head coach's boss? Obviously, who brought him in and knew him better than anybody here? That, of course, was Ray Anderson. So, when you have, for me, it's just seems like a 3-man show. Ray Anderson, Herm Edwards, Antonio Pierce. I mean, that seems like the top, the 1 to 2 to 3 sequence that created the circumstance. I know, Ralph, you outlined it, in a very simple but effective way in a tweet about, how this whole thing unfolded, essentially. And that's, again, to me, the hierarchy of blame. And then from there, you have the lower level assistants, the young ones who were fired immediately and essentially had their careers more or less ruined because none of them, I think, are in coaching any longer. So, you certainly have to start at the top.
And I think that, and I really don't want to rant here. Like I don't want to get
rant away.
Oh man. When Ray Anderson made the decision to bring in Herm Edwards, which by all accounts, it was prior to firing Todd Graham. When he made the decision to bring in his friend and former client who hadn't coached in the NFL in 9 years, hadn't coached in college football in 30 seasons, he did so with the caveat that he believed that you could replace one cog in the machine and make it more efficient, that you could keep the offensive coordinator, the defensive coordinator, all of the assistants, just change out the head of the snake and you're going to be fine. It seemed ridiculously naive at the time. It really made it seem like Ray Anderson didn't know how college football operated or functioned, but I think somewhere deep in the recesses of his mind, he believed that Todd Graham was such an abrasive personality that the reason that Arizona State's assistants left to go take better opportunities is that they couldn't get along with Todd Graham. Like the idea that Mike Norvell would turn down a head coaching job to stick around with Todd Graham maybe was something that Ray Anderson believed. It just didn't make sense. All of these coaches, they're taking promotions, right? And maybe Todd Graham's a tough guy to get along with. I'm not going to argue with anybody there, but the idea that you can just take a coach and give them somebody else's staff is one of the most naive things that I've ever seen in my life. Billy Napier left within days of Herm Edwards being hired. Dick Bennett left too, and he's had things to say on his way out the door. So you had some people that were willing to try to attempt to get Herm Edwards up to speed on what the responsibilities of his job were going to be. Herm Edwards was hesitant to bring his family to the place where he was going to live and work. Herm Edwards was hesitant to change his schedule from lifting weights to jazz music at 4:30 every morning, even though ASU's got to kick off at 9 at night sometimes. Like he was under the impression that he didn't need to change much about the life he lived at all to be all in on making Arizona State what it needed to be. Those concerns were there from the jump. The fact that coordinators left and he had to be responsible for hiring people was concerning from the jump. The Devil's Digest mascot thing was funny at the time. In retrospect, it's horrifying. I thought our Adidas jerseys were girls' jerseys. Funny at the time, horrifying in retrospect. Bringing on Antonio Pierce seemed to be a good idea, but this is somebody who had put his high school that he had coached on probation. This is somebody that to make him a position coach out of the gate when he's the one that drove Plaxico Burress away from the scene when he shot himself instead of reporting it or doing anything that he should have. On the day that it was announced that Antonio Pierce was hired, he fired off a gambling partnership tweet that he had to delete. Like
also buddies with the Fire Festival guy, right?
Yeah, he appeared in the Firefest documentary alongside Billy McFarland as one of the investors in his metal credit card thing. Also, I think had helped fund a strip club at one point. Like this is a guy with a lot of hands in a lot of pots, and to bring him in is one thing if he's going to be supervised. But by all accounts, and every assistant coach and everybody that left the program that I talked to, they were all told that whatever Antonio Pierce says, Herm says, that he gave Antonio Pierce ultimate authority over the entire program. Antonio Pierce cleared a lot of people out. Arizona State liked to brag that they got wide receivers drafted in back-to-back first rounds. They were bragging about that, but they fired the man who was actually the position coach at the time, Charlie Fisher, who left a head coaching job to come work for Herm Edwards, right? Donnie Yantis was the recruiting coordinator. They pushed him out to make Antonio Pierce the recruiting coordinator. Well, they had a whole recruiting department. They had a setup in a way that they said that they were going to do things. If you wanted to offer a kid, you had to send it to Al Luganbill and the recruiting committee, and they had to evaluate it and make sure that it was going to be okay. Well, Antonio Pierce didn't want that kind of oversight, and all of a sudden Arizona State offers 450 kids, 440 of those are uncommittable offers. They're throwing out offers like candy that don't mean anything. They can't retain their running backs coach, and I do love that they hired Sean Aguano. But they're starting to lose coaches, and this entire idea that Herm Edwards was going to be the one to retain coaches and that they're not economic factors in this was completely naive. And then the coaches that did want to stick around, they're firing. Donnie Yantis, gone. Charlie Fisher, gone. Rob Likens, who ran a better offense than his two succeedents, gone, right? So you get rid of all these coaches, then you give Antonio Pierce the power to hire. And he fills he essentially acquires more and more power, and he fills the building with people who are going to be loyal to him. But you still have this recruiting department, and you still have this group of other coaches like Dave Christensen and Kevin Mawai. And for years, Dave Christensen recruited offensive linemen to Arizona State, telling them that Kevin Mawai was going to be his replacement. Well, it turns out that Kevin Mawai, Dave Christensen, Donnie Yantis, a lot of these guys are maybe a little bit more politically conservative. Well, you have a large portion of the staff that is the exact opposite. And so you have political arguments going on and political division in the ASU locker room at the same time that America's completely divided and locked down due to COVID, and there's racial issues and massive conversations going on all over the country. Some of those same divisions and cracks are happening within the ASU program, and I think that there was some resentment for who people were as people. And so then you work on moving some of those people out of the program. Promises are broken to Kevin and Y. You have recruiting department people who are upset because the operations being run so jankily. Like there was one meeting, and this comes from several sources. There was one meeting one time where they met, Herm Edwards, Antonio Pierce, and a couple of other people met, and they were discussing reorganizing a department, hiring some people, firing some people, moving some people around, and what their new salaries were going to be. And they left it up on the projector in the room of the meeting that they had just had, and they left. So when the recruiting department came back in to have that meeting, they pulled it up. They saw who was going to get hired, fired, moved around before they actually got to have these conversations with the coaches. Like it was a complete office, Michael Scott run operation where Herm Edwards was completely and solely reliant on his Hermisms and the colloquialisms that he had penned his many books with. But the words and actions, the bottom line is nothing that Herm Edwards said actually had any substance to it. It wasn't necessarily applicable. And one of the most disappointing things is Arizona State was actually ahead of the curve to say, we're going to treat you like professionals. But the moment the NCAA opened the door for professionalism to be part of college football, Ray Anderson's like, oh, not like that. We didn't mean that. Actually, I need someone to come in here and take my place because this new era of college football is just too much for me. After pretending that that's what we were going to be the innovative leader on. That we were going to, and so just everything about what happened was completely ridiculous. And for Ray Anderson to be so focused in on being able to deliver his I told you so, and he did a great interview with Andrew Hobner prior to the 2021 season saying, this year's going to be the year, and I can't wait to deliver that I told you so to everybody that was super nasty about when I brought in Herm Edwards, and he used that word several times, nasty. And then before the season to start, for this news to break, and George Reister and I had talked about it. Pete Thamel came out with it. Obviously, Doug Holler and all these reports came out that fracture in the locker room had led to a group of people putting together a dossier and sending it to Pete Thamel, sending it to the NCAA. Like the idea that people thought that it would be better to tear down Arizona State's program than to work for Herm Edwards and Antonio Pierce one more day. I hate that happened. I understand everybody that hates the people who did that. I think that they've misdirected some of their anger to guys like Kevin Y. I don't think Kevin Y was compiling digital receipts in a dossier, guys. I don't even know. I'm not 100% sure he knew how to check his email. So, like, it was more than just one person. It was a group. There was a massive fracture. The fact that Herm Edwards couldn't see that is a massive indictment of his character. The fact that 2 cell phone Antonio Pierce didn't see this coming, that he thought it was fine to just alienate every single person who thought differently than him, is absurd. And the success that Herm Edwards and Antonio Pierce are currently having in their roles on ESPN and as head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders has to be measured against the fact that the people that Antonio Pierce brought into the building to do his bidding are all going to be facing these penalties that are going to keep them out of a profession that, they put their fate into the hands of a Herm Edwards and an Antonio Pierce. And I think that Ray Anderson, a big reason why I respected Ray Anderson, a really big reason, was that he was a huge part of getting the Rooney Rule instituted and breaking the glass ceiling for African-American head coaches in the NFL. I mean, the ratio has just always been completely embarrassing. The idea that 70% of a league's players can be black, but they're not qualified for the highest position and to be leaders has always been absurd. Ray Anderson helped break that up. He helped make it so that it wasn't about who you knew, but what you could do. And the fact that he was just biding his time so that he could do that himself and that it helped ruin Arizona State's athletic program, should be the lens with which he is viewed and his legacy forever. And when he teaches his one class a week that has 3 other co-professors that meets from Tuesday from 9 in the morning until noon, that he gets paid $500,000 per class to teach, I hope this comes up. And I hope he has to. I hope that he is forced to lecture his 57 students that he has in this class on just how bad of a job he did and what, if any, lessons can be learned here. And when it comes to Herm Edwards, he was supposed to be all about integrity. All about integrity. All of that is completely out the window. He is a vapid, nonsensical, rambling grandpa at this point. And anybody who puts any credence on any pearl of wisdom that he puts out needs to measure it against his actions and his unwillingness to put his all into Arizona State as a program. And the fact that he quit after losing to Eastern Michigan. He quit because that's what a mutual decision is. That's what Ray Anderson is telling us, is that Herm Edwards and he agreed that Herm Edwards should no longer be the coach. When you're somebody's manager and you're responsible for stewarding the resources of a university, and somebody comes to you and they say, I don't think I should work here anymore. And by them saying that, that would free you and your organization up of any financial obligation to them whatsoever. You got to let them quit. But that's not what happened. He worked out a $4.4 million buyout for his friend. And then continued to spend the next 2 years saying that it was the assistants that they put too much trust in. I'm just too trusting. My weakness is just that I care too much. Like it was just it is all completely.
Isn't that a line from a Limp or a Papa Roach song? Stars. My weakness is I care too much.
Well, I think so. And they cut.
We're gonna be looking at. I'm sorry for interrupting, but that just like I heard it in tunes in my head. So okay.
No, yeah, you're right. It absolutely is. I know.
And they did cut our program into pieces. So
everybody's last resort. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that. I do not think that those two men are respectable. I do not. And I have pity and empathy for the younger coaches who were caught up in this and had their path and college football dreams derailed. Would love to see them take some ownership and apologize. But instead, I'm sure we're just going to be seeing Antonio Pierce fire up Raider Nation and Herm Edwards do Booger McFarland nut taps on ESPN like nothing ever happened. And that is extraordinarily discouraging. But I would say that this should be the last class that Ray Anderson teaches at Arizona State University. And it would be perfectly appropriate for us to pay him the rest of his contract, but with the stipulation that he never set foot on campus to play pickleball with Muffy ever again. Never again. He should never be in Tempe. He should never be in Phoenix. He should never be in the state of Arizona. He is the worst Sun Devil of all time that did not commit any felonies.
And what, he was just ASU's representative? Was it at the Final Four or some NCAA tournament event or something? I just remember reading about that, and that was obviously just a matter of weeks ago, right?
And it's a harsh reflection on Michael Crow, because I still believe to this day that Michael Crow would rather Ray Anderson be in a position of power within ASU athletics, and that he feels as though their values are aligned. And I'm not 100% sure that Dr. Crow is for as much as he seemed to be very, very, very concerned with Arizona State's reputation, especially under Todd Graham, telling them that if he ever cheated, that he would be fired on the spot. I don't think he considers this to be a big deal, or at least nothing that he has said or done would indicate that he believes this to be a stain on his legacy or Ray Anderson's, for that matter. I mean, it was at a point at one time when Ray Anderson hadn't posted on social media in 2 years because he couldn't wander out into those streets without people throwing tomatoes. And the idea that you can't even have your secretary gas up the program on social media, should tell you, like, this man is not welcome here. No one wants to hear from him. Cool, the swim team was good. We have We have the worst women's basketball team we've ever had. Ever. That's on him. Our basketball team, the budget numbers just came out. Wilner put those out there, and I don't know if an expense report is more of a reflection of what Bobby Hurley did or didn't want to spend, or if that was his actual recruiting budget. But it is very embarrassing to hear the demands of Ray Anderson, who wanted to be top 3 in the Pac-12 in all sports, top 15 in the country in all sports, get 4-star recruits in all sports. But then you look at the spending and how it measures up against that, and it's absurd. And you look at all of these things that are going on and you say, okay, we won in swimming, wrestling's doing pretty good. Is it worth it? Is it worth it that you have to do several emergency podcasts on the bad things that are happening? And to me, it's not. And it feels like the fans are taking this much more seriously than the people that need to. And I don't know. I thought it was going to be relief today, but instead it made me upset, because at no point have I ever seen contrition, and the fact that they came out and thanked Dr. Crow for his participation in this process. We never should have been part of this process for him to have exemplary participation in. That's like my kid throwing a tantrum and breaking a window, and me writing a letter about how great he was at cleaning up the glass. We never should have been in that position in the first place. You don't get credit for making an attempt to clean up the mess that you caused. I don't know, man. I don't know. This whole thing is just extraordinarily disappointing. I would say, to me, everybody is responsible for their own actions, and so you have to factor that in when it comes to Antonio Pierce, when it comes to the assistants that he hired, when it comes to the people that decided to take down the university. You want to call them rats, you can do whatever you want. At this point, it doesn't really matter how we feel, because it's over. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the guy that hired his friend to do a job he wasn't qualified to do, didn't support him in trying to get that job done, which created a power vacuum, which was then taken over by a guy who has a career of questionable character. I mean, when he came out for the Super Bowl, when he was with the New York Giants, I think he just left his dog at home for 3 weeks alone. He took care of Arizona State as a program about as well as he took care of that dog. Like, Antonio Pierce wrecked this place, and I get that players got along with him, and I understand if they like him as a person, but I'm a fan of the laundry. I'm a fan of the city. I'm a fan of the university, and that's where my degree's from. If somebody comes in and they mess the whole place up, but they made a few friends in the process, I'm sorry. I got to speak truth to those people that, whose Arizona State legacy, the Jack Joneses, right? Who got a degree from Arizona State. He's going to represent Arizona State for the rest of his life. Jaden Daniels is an Arizona State graduate. He's going to represent Arizona State for the rest of their life. And they're going to walk around saying Antonio Pierce is the man. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. He might have served you, but I really don't think he did. Not to the best of his ability. You could have been heroes in this town for the rest of your life. And instead, nobody wants to hear from you. Nobody wants to see you. Nobody wants to have anything to do with you. You're not welcome here. You're not welcome in the maroon and gold. I don't know. I'm super, super disappointed. And to me, it all goes back to the arrogance of the person who thought that they could force a bad idea into a good one, and is still currently being paid close to $1 million annually to teach one class where he needs 3 helpers, one of which includes Lon Babby, who also sucks, as professors at Arizona State University.
Well, that's a name I've not heard in a while there too. Also, had no idea about that aspect. Obviously, this is a big day, something that we've been anticipating. We recorded that local recruiting podcast. Ralph, you, me, Chili, Cody, and then was it the next week is like, hey, maybe not. When you got caught wind of all this, fast forward to today, we're getting some clarity. It looks like perhaps if things are on the track that what it seems in terms of the punishment for ASU, the ones left behind this mess that was left by Herm, AP, and such. As we close out, do we think that the worst days are behind? That the healing, the growth, the attempts to improve can now truly begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still it takes a while to wear off. I mean, you think about, again, I always go back to the condition of this program and the enthusiasm and the optimism that this program had in between 2020 and 21. So like right here, right now, about the spring of 2021, there was as much eager anticipation as there was, since those Todd Graham years, 7-8 years prior, which puts that on par with anything ASU's had as far as optimism in the last 25 to 30 years. I mean, it was a rare place to be. And you figured things were rolling. That recruiting class that ASU had for that 2021 class that obviously fell apart. The players that branched out and how many names are going to be called over the course of the NFL draft weekend that are former Sun Devils. Probably, actually, in all certainty, there will be more former Sun Devils drafted than there will be guys that go into the NFL from Arizona State. So you look at this and the what could have been. And that, I think, is really, really aggravating. So it's going to take a while to shake off just everything that's all this frustration and angst that's manifested inside a lot of fans, for these 3 years. I mean, that just doesn't go away right away. And for a lot of fans, there's still a remaining part of the equation, that's in place there that is prohibiting these fans from fully supporting Arizona State athletics. I'm not saying I agree or disagree, just saying that that's the case. And that's even with folks like Ray Anderson, Herm Edwards, Antonio Pierce, and others being very far away from this football program, or at least in the case of one, as Ralph's mentioned, not completely far away. So given a very long-winded answer here, but it's going to take a little bit to shake off this feeling that's been the case for a few years. If we look at the punishments themselves, as we've talked about a couple times, if it falls within that single-digit scholarship range for 1 year or whatever, something like that, then that's not too terribly bad. Some of the other ones don't matter. I don't care at all about vacating wins and losses in games like that, especially from the 2021 and 22 seasons. Yeah, maybe U of A fans would have a fun day if that 2020 70-7 victory would be vacated. But I mean, Arizona had basketball seasons and wins vacated from the Lute Olson era, and who really cares about that sort of thing? So, and obviously the show cause stuff for the guys that are going to be getting them, that's completely useless as well. So it's a mixed feeling. It's really inconclusive. It's not much closure. And even when it comes down, and even if it's a very reasonable within context outcome as far as like the scholarship limitations and things like that, again, it's still going to be a very bitter feeling because it's the people that ruined this program did so, and just the timing of that with other things that people tend not to like with NIL and the transfer portal. There are a lot of Sun Devil fans whose view of college athletics, college football, and of Arizona State football is so very different now than it was 3 years ago. And that's a shame because, a lot of us know just how purely fun college athletics can be when they're at their best. And what's been going on for ASU is just real bad in a number of ways. So it's going to take a while for this to shake off.
Yeah, I think the problem is that on the day one of the NFL draft, you're going to hear Jaden Daniels' name called, and that's going to suck. On day two, you're going to hear Ricky Pearsall's name called, and that's going to suck. On day three, you're probably going to hear Johnny Wilson's name called, and that's going to suck. And then you're going to get NFL draft analysis on ESPN from Herm Edwards, and that's going to suck. And for one of 57 kids who has to go to class next Tuesday in terrible negotiating 501 or whatever Ray Anderson teaches, that's going to suck. Their whole Tuesday morning is going to be ruined. There's just going to be all of these reminders, and it's not going to go away because everybody seemed to have escaped any accountability whatsoever. And the next time that Michael Crow decides to sit down with student reporters, because that's all he wants to talk to, and give an interview about how actually it wasn't that bad, and maybe we're going to bring Ray Anderson back and put him in a role with Olympic sports or something like that, that's going to suck. Unless somebody comes out and acknowledges what happened, where it went wrong, admits that mistakes were made, admits that all of the very loud voices were probably right on the fact that hiring somebody who had been out of football for 9 years and in the previous 2 years before that went 2-22 in their last 24 NFL games might not have been the best idea in the entire world. We're just going to keep having reminders. And so the best thing for Arizona State is going to be for this season to get started. I'm going to have to say this out loud. You can see that little symbol right above my head. The best thing for Arizona State is going to be to go out, put a hurting on Wyoming, and start the ball rolling on just a new era. It really is. And for Ken, and I think Kenny Dillingham has the right attitude. He's going to hate this podcast, but he has the right attitude on, like, hey, we have to, if we're going to move on, we have to move on. But on a news day like this is absolutely something that we have to talk about. I don't think that I am capable of completely moving on. I'm going to be mad until someone shows some type of contrition or isn't just being aloof on television, or isn't giving speeches to the locker room in Las Vegas about not cheating the game. Like, it's what's going to be hard is just the constant public hypocrisy from the people who have taken no responsibility whatsoever. Like them or not, rules exist. They do. They just do. And so, the idea that Herm Edwards, and I'm going to get serious here for a second. Herm Edwards' mother almost died of COVID. He gave a speech at Cornerstone Church talking about how his mother almost died of COVID and how we need to respect this disease and how it's a really big deal. All the while, they're having families fly out to Sun Devil Stadium, go against NCAA regulations, public health advice, and stuff at the time when he almost had to bury his own mother. Like, is this guy an idiot? Is he an idiot? Like, was it worth the possible advantage that you could get? Do you really believe that you could host 30 plus kids and their families and not have those people tell other coaches? If Arizona State's fractured staff hadn't dropped the dossier, it was going to come from either Mario Cristobal or David Shaw. They were both talking about it how the hell do you think I found out about it? So, like, this whole thing is just completely absurd, and I don't think we're going to escape it because I don't think that there's going to be any accountability whatsoever. There really isn't. And USC had to go through this and watch Pete Carroll have a bunch of success with Seattle, and eventually they got over it, right? I wonder what that path is for Arizona State. It seems to be the path would be to win so that people can just focus all their positive energy on Kenny Dillingham, his staff, and what they're building. But what I worry about is Michael Crow giving an interview 4 years from now saying that none of this was a big deal. Everybody overreacted, and let's bring Ray Anderson back in some capacity. Like, those are the things I worry about. Because if nobody is actually publicly taking this seriously, or at least making comments that the people that were actually involved in making the decisions that led us to this point owe us anything, whether it's contrition or back pay or just to get the hell out of Dodge, get out of our faces. If nobody is willing to say those things, then it's really hard to believe that healing can start, right? But Kenny Dillingham can go out there. He can win. We can get the ball to Jake Smith on a bubble screen. He can run 75 yards to the house against my Wyoming Cowboys, and then maybe we forget this just for a minute. And that's what I'm hoping for.
A lot of angles at play, and obviously this is a day that we've been watching or looking forward to, and at least getting some word from the NCAA. We got word, and we'll see how it all plays out. And like you said, Ralph, I mean, nothing really kind of helps people move on a little bit better than wins, but this is always something university. Maybe, hopefully, we don't have a third breaking news podcast in 3 days. So, hopefully we can look back on our next episode at the entirety of spring ball and some of the positivity there. But Ralph, thanks for coming on, joining us. You got a lot of stuff going on with George Reister. If you want to catch up our listeners on all of the ways they can follow you and what you're up to.
Unafraid Show on YouTube with George Reister. I'm also thinking about becoming a Dobson High School booster in honor of Joe Healy.
Let's go. All right.
Who popped up in my wife's yearbook that I was looking through.
Oh, yeah.
So I was able to tweet out a photo of you.
Making really like cryptic pro wrestling references that were like very time specific at something that was going on like in that chunk of time that have no bearing whatsoever here 20, 25 years later.
I will say this. I think we should get Dobson High's football field name changed to Joe Healy Stadium.
Okay. I mean,
or literally anything other than what it's called right now. And I'll let listeners look that up themselves.
Oh, okay. Because I don't know. I mean, what is it? Is it bad?
Dick Palace Stadium, the Dick Palace.
So good. I mean, like, just giving the high school kids that ammunition for the memes is, I mean, Jesus.
Well, they don't win at home a lot, so I'm saying we got to change the field name.
I'll gladly accept. Yeah, I'll just keep my mouth shut on comments that I'd make. We'll keep this family friendly. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So, barring any more disastrous news coming out about the Sun Devil Athletics, Joe and I will be back next Monday with a couple of guests in studio to break down what we saw in spring ball. In the meantime, give us a 5-star review in the podcast platform of your choice, and we will see you hopefully on better terms on our next episode.